Hi, I'm Tony. I'm an author, presenter at Sky Sports, and years ago I went to the jungle and got ill. Very ill. So this is my podcast adventure to find more energy. It's packed with biohacking, science, health tech, supplements, and some of the most well-known experts on the planet.
This is something I spent 4 months of my life doing with electrodes glued to my head so that you can do a lifetime worth of meditation.
Decide what you don't give a fuck about, which is something you don't care about.
Some of it gets quite out there.
I had some stem cells sent up to my house that I had stored, and then I injected myself with mannitol.
And we even hack hangovers.
Alcohol is poisonous. So is water and oxygen in the wrong dosage.
So that's my podcast, Zestology. Live life with energy, vitality, and motivation. And today, all about the healing power of the natural world, something I've had a lot of cause to reflect on over the last week or so, because you might have seen on my Instagram, me and 5 friends, we went up to Yorkshire at the weekend, beautiful part of the UK, and we did a walking challenge called the Yorkshire 3 Peaks. And I'm going to be honest, there was a worm of anxiety at the back of my mind and in the pit of my stomach before we did this challenge, because it's quite the challenge. You start about 6 o'clock in the morning. I think we set off at 6:05. You immediately ascend one of the tallest peaks in Yorkshire, one of the 3 tallest peaks, Penny Ghent, and you're up there about 7 a.m. It's just sort of sheer uphill, really. And then for the next 10 hours, you're walking up and down hills or mountains. And then about 4:30 in the afternoon, if you manage to complete it, you get to the pub, which is probably not the best way to rehydrate after such a challenge, but that's what we did. The worm of anxiety was because, you know, I'm with my best friends. I don't want to be bringing up the rear. I don't want to be the weakest link, if you know what I mean. I was thinking, am I going to be fit enough? Am I going to be okay? And actually, not only was I okay, but I feel hugely rejuvenated from having spent all that time in nature with my friends, walking and exercising. It's a good reminder of what our bodies are capable of and the rejuvenating power of the natural world. And what's really interested me is that I've put a lot of stress on my body over the last week or so. I mean, that's probably more steps. I mean, I did the National 3 Peaks a few years ago. This one's a slightly different one in that you're just walking all day, but I don't think it's possibly more steps in a day than I've ever done before. Around 60,000 and all up and downhill. I must have eaten about 6,000 calories as well. But since then, my heart rate variability has been great and I've been feeling great as well. So that's the power of the natural world, which we will explore more today with Vanessa Chakour, who is a herbalist and a naturopath and an absolute expert in all things to do with the natural world and how it can heal you. And she is the founder of Sacred Warrior. And I think you're going to love this podcast. Here she is. Okay, Vanessa, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, yeah, great to have you on the podcast. I've really been looking forward to this. And I sort of feel, I don't know about you, but you know, at this very precise moment that we're recording this podcast, I feel more than ever we need to reconnect with the world, ground ourselves a bit more. I think what you do is so important, and it's harder than ever when you're worrying about all the things that we've had to worry about over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's I mean, let's go over what you do and why it might be so relevant at the moment. Could you give people because I've been doing my due diligence on you and you're an expert in a lot of different areas. So explain to people what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I would say my writing and my work, the whole underlying mission is to basically remove the illusion that we're separate from nature. Yeah. That we depend on the ecosystem in order to thrive, that we're part of nature. I founded an organization called Sacred Warrior, which takes people into experiences of reconnection, building intimacy with land. And I've done that through the lens of herbalism and just these very immersive experiences. I've done a lot of retreats in Scotland and Costa Rica, where I basically facilitate retreats that are taught by local teachers. And they have the same intention, to bring people into experiences of reconnection, And my book, Awakening Artemis, also deals with that. And I talk about my own journey of healing through the lens of herbalism primarily. But I see my body as an ecosystem. And I just know that if the land isn't healthy, so am I. And so my work really is all about that. It's about, reconnecting to nature and realizing it's, the health and well-being of the earth is integral to our own health and well-being.
I hanker after more of an intimacy with the land. And I almost feel like that's the secret to long-term happiness, but I can't quite give up the city living and the mod cons and everything else.
I think you can have both, though. I really do. I lived in Brooklyn for many years, and actually that's where my practice of herbalism started, which might seem kind of strange. But the so-called weeds that grow through the cracks in the sidewalk have such rich history, folklore associated with them. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily harvest a plant from the sidewalk for medicine, but knowing who the plant is, what they're used for, it shifted my relationship to the land in the city and really awaken the sense of wonder I had when I was a kid. And so that becomes a practice of mindful awareness. You can absolutely build intimacy with land in the city, whether it's just learning how to identify the trees along the sidewalks or walking in the city park and becoming so much more aware of all of the plants around you and the different species and what they've been used for and, who they are, the significance, in terms of the roles in the ecosystem too. So there's so much to awaken to, whether you're in an urban area or in a rural area.
It's a bit easier to awaken when you're in a rural area and you're sitting on your porch and you can't see any civilization as far as the mind can see. It's easier to tune in to the senses of nature. But as you say, that's a nice way to think about it. If you are in Brooklyn, you're looking at weeds in the sidewalk.
Ironically, I think sometimes people in rural areas look at nature more as scenery. Whereas in urban areas, we have to make a concerted effort to connect with individual plants. And there's something really valuable about that. I grew up in a rural area, but then I moved to the city and I was so desperate to connect with nature that I had to make more of an effort. And it was that actually that led me to the practices that I do now, because I connect with plants individually. And I'm like that with people too. I prefer to develop, intimate one-on-one connections. I feel so much more of a sense of, there's more of a sense of connection there, intimacy, belonging. And so herbalism for me was really a practice of developing intimacy with land as much as it was learning how, reclaiming ancestral practices of healing, becoming much more aware and also learning how to heal myself in relationship with the land. But I really think that we can do it just as well in the city as we can in rural areas. It blows my mind, how unaware I was growing up in a rural area. Even though I felt this strong connection to nature, there was so much I was oblivious to before I started to really learn and develop this practice.
Yeah. And it all goes back to sort of living in the moment, doesn't it? Which really is the only place to be happy, which is fantastic. Yeah. And, obviously bringing it back to what's going on at the moment, a lot of us have, it pales into insignificance compared to what's going on if you actually live in a war zone. But people are really quite traumatized just by reading about it.
Oh, yeah.
And just by hearing about it and by being constantly exposed to it as well. So how can we start to heal from everything that has been thrown at us over the last couple of years? How can we heal by reconnecting with nature and rewilding the mind?
I think it's so complicated. I think for one thing, we are so overwhelmed, like you said, with information, and it's almost impossible for our emotional bodies to keep up with the amount of information that's coming our way. And I know just in my own life that I am not making an impact or a difference if I get swept up in that, if I'm just sucked into it and sucked into my grief around it, that I could be it could spiral me into this place if I'm just constantly berating myself with the news where I actually don't really make an impact. So I know, and, many people in my community, we talk about this, that actually unplugging from it, I am in a better place and much more centered and stronger and grounded. And I really believe in doing work locally to impact things globally, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's so important for us to consciously unplug. There's a balance between, one of the things that I do is I don't listen to the news. I don't have a television. I just read. And that is easier for me to really, you know, unplug consciously that way. Because I know that I'm no good for anybody else if I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah, no, me too. And actually, you know, it's so overwhelming. At the moment we're recording this in the sort of first week of March, and everything going on in the Ukraine at the moment, it is very overwhelming. And as we've said, with complete respect for the fact it's not the same, it's pales into insignificance to those who are actually what they're going through when they're there. But I have been thinking a lot about exposure to news. And we had a funny conversation in my house this morning because we love to listen to the radio in the mornings. One radio station here, which is brilliant. Well, all the BBC stations don't have adverts. Are you in London or are you in America?
I'm in the Northeast.
Right. Okay. So do you know Six Music, the radio station?
No, I need to check it out.
We love it. We love it. It's great. And it doesn't have any adverts because BBC, and they have news every half hour. So every half hour, I was getting up this morning during breakfast time and switching the radio off for the news. And my wife jokingly said that I was burying my head in the sand, although she sort of gets what I'm doing. But you expressed it very well there. I don't feel like I can be my best self if I'm constantly worrying about what's going on elsewhere, because I've got lots of empathy to give, and it's there if I'm listening to it, as well as anxiety. I'm good at anxiety too. so it needs to switch off.
And I know that I like how ultimately, I mean, if I really get very specific with it, how am I helping the people in the Ukraine just by being sad about what's happening there, you know, or helping anyone or helping the planet by just being upset. Action is really important, you know, and it's something I reflect on a lot, you know. I just the whole engaging with social media becomes complicated around this time because I believe in, you know, just really just working on oneself and like you said, you know, just peeling back. I think we all have a unique role to play in, you know, when it comes to whether it's healing our environment or social justice or activism. And just getting in a place of overwhelm can make us feel almost paralyzed, which doesn't help anyone. Yeah,
I agree. And I've been reading this article by Mark Manson. I don't know if you've heard of Mark Manson. He's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he wrote an article that takes 45 minutes to read on why news is bad for you. It's very well researched. It's very funny as well. And you know, not funny, but he's an entertaining writer. And he talks about all these themes quite a bit. And I think, you know, I personally do think the news will find you if you need to hear it anyway in this day and age. And whether I get 5 minutes on news or 5 hours a day, I'm still capable of taking the same amount of action as well. So, you know, for me, it's not having any news at all, but just having a little bit rather than every minute of every day.
Yeah, no, it's way too much, you know, and doing what we can to help, and then just being aware of what's going on and then turning it off, you know, so we can be whole and not be just so absolutely depleted. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about connecting with nature and rewilding and becoming intimate with the land. And, you know, today's a lovely sunny day. I've spent loads of time outside. I've really thought, you know, first signs of spring. You can just tell there's a different quality of the light today to how there often is in the middle of winter, that the sun's slightly higher in the sky. And that is me really noticing, you know, the land and nature and the changing of the seasons. And I got a lot of pleasure from that today. What are the sort of things that people could start to do straight away, which you talk about in your book?
Well, one thing is to learn about the plants that are right under your feet, no matter where you are, whether you're in an urban area and not just under your feet, but the trees that are growing right outside your door. Learn who they are, what they've been used for traditionally, medicinally, their history, their lore. You know, there's the names, if you don't know how to identify them, who are they? You know, learn how to identify the plants and trees around you. And it brings the land alive in a different way. So you walk outside and you just see the land of scenery one day, but then say, for example, you walk outside and you learn that, oh my goodness, right outside all these years, there's been a linden tree right here. And there's so much, folklore surrounding this tree. There's so much medicine to be had in this tree. This tree is so valuable for pollinators. This is a whole world in and of itself. So the next day you walk out, you'll look at that tree completely differently, in a totally different way. It comes alive. And then the same thing with many of the so-called weeds under our feet, so just slowly beginning to identify the plants around you is such a beautiful mindfulness practice. And, like I write about in the book, each plant or tree or fungi is a world in and of themselves. So it's an endless lifelong learning process. And then I've become really fascinated too on the relationships between the plants, how are they interacting with each other? And then for me, how can I support the ecosystem? So that's kind of what I'm alluding to when I say, working locally. How can I support because so much land around us is depleted, and there's so much re-education that we need and remembering that we need to do in order to heal the environment. So, that mindfulness practice was just simply learning to identify the plants and trees around you and taking one at a time to really delve deep.
Yeah. Interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you my podcast partners are Magnesium Breakthrough. And Magnesium Breakthrough has a new formula. They have been partnering with this podcast for well over a year now. And the new formula contains cofactors like B6 and manganese that help with the absorption of magnesium. So as if it wasn't good enough already, what they've put in is they've put a small amount of cofactors in there to help you absorb the magnesium better. Magnesium is involved in 80% of the body's metabolic reactions. 75% of people are not getting enough magnesium. This stuff definitely helps you sleep at night, keeps you regular, keeps inflammation down, helps with sleep. And the key thing, the reason for listening to this podcast and the reason for doing this podcast, energy. It helps with low energy and it helps you boost your energy as well. If you're interested, if you want to get involved, you can go to magbreakthrough.com/zestology. Use the code zestology10. Love to hear how you get on. Do try that new formula as well, because I know the guys at Biooptimizers are really working at tweaking that formula and making it as effective as possible. And if you want to use that exclusive offer for my listeners, go to magbreakthrough.com/zestology and use zestology10. And one way you may want to use it is just take a couple of capsules before you go to bed and just notice how your mood and energy levels are afterwards. That is a good way to test it. You could even give yourself a mark out of 10 before you take it, and then a mark out of 10 the next day, and see how much more rested you are as well. magbreakthrough.com/zestology. Use the code zestology10. That code works in the UK at the Biooptimizers site as well. Now, back to the show. I know from looking at your book, the way that you separate it out, it's not just the mindfulness around the plants around you, it's what they can potentially the plants can do for you. I've always been very into natural supplements. And it's just fascinating learning about the properties and the energies of, I mean, obviously this podcast is about energy, and that's why I wanted to talk to you about energy a bit, the energies of the certain herbs and plants that you talk about in the book. Could you go into that a bit more in relation to our own personal energies?
Absolutely. Well, so one really easy way for people to engage in this, for example, is looking at a plant like dandelion. They are so demonized, but this plant has a very fiery energy and unbelievable resilience that comes back year after year, has the strength to push through concrete, cracks in the sidewalk, and just populates land quickly. It's very, very fiery energy, bright yellow flower. Whereas a tree like the linden tree, just the expression of the growth, very watery, sort of like there's cascade of branches. If the linden trees are allowed to grow and aren't, clipped or trimmed, the branches will cascade down almost like a waterfall. And in herbalism, they are actually very mucilaginous and slimy, soothing. And so the ways that the plants grow in the wild, in nature, often somehow express the medicine that they offer our bodies, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
St. John's wort is another one that blooms right around the summer solstice, which is obviously, as we know, the longest day of the year. And as many people know, St. John's wort is often used for seasonal affective disorder during the darkest days of the year. So we harness that kind of that solar energy when we make a tincture in the summertime, and then we bring it into winter when we're struggling with depression during this really dark time. So the plants are fascinating, and the ways that they have, evolved and adapted to the ecosystem really express something about the medicine that they offer us, which makes sense. So you can look at the shapes, textures, colors, the way that they grow, where they grow, as a way to think about maybe the elemental correspondences of the plant, whether they're fiery or watery or correspond more with the element of air. And, there's so many different ways to think about holistic medicine and holistic herbalism. But I like to think about my body as being an ecosystem. And often in holistic practices, we think about, what is our constitution? Are we fiery? Do we tend to run dry? When you get a cold, do you get really mucusy? Or do you get like a really dry cough and a raw, fiery throat? Then you can go to either a drying plant or a mucilaginous plant to help you heal. So, but you can start with just observing the plants in the wild and how they grow and see if that corresponds with the medicine.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, all that makes so much sense. I'm fascinated to know how you apply that in your own life. I mean, for example, today, what plants, herbs have you used and consumed? Is there anything that you take every day? Is it always seasonal? I'm fascinated. And is it tinctures, or is it the herbs in there just plucked out of the garden? What goes on there?
So one of the things I'm drinking today is nettles. And I right on when we're in the cusp of spring, my body tends to crave nettles. And they're a natural antihistamine. They help to prevent spring allergies. I've been working with them for years this time of year. I teach a course called The Wheel of the Year with my friend Agav in Scotland. And one of the things we talk about is herbalism as a practice of preventative medicine. So this is just one way to approach it, knowing what your challenges are around the wheel of the year and working with a plant to help prevent that from happening. Yeah. And it's just a way to prepare your body for what's to come. Nettles for me, part of my practice has been becoming so much more aware of my body as I work with plants. So nettles tend to be a little bit drying for me. So when I had my infusion this morning, I paired nettles with marshmallow root, which is a moistening plant, to create that balance.
Right.
So right
these nettles
now,
that sorry to interrupt, do you just go and literally pick them that morning, or have you picked them a while back and dried them, or have you got tinctures, or what?
Yeah, I pick them and dry them because they're not outside my door right now. So I pick them during the season and dry them, and I store them in a glass mason jar. So
and that process in itself is very much getting back to nature, isn't it? It's something beautiful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, the practice of working with medicine, harvesting plants. I have partnerships with different medicinal herb farms in places where I go and where I teach. So I harvest there, and then I often forage in the wild. And yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful way of reconnecting to land.
Yeah, that's great. I have a passion project side podcast and site about histamine intolerance. So you mentioned histamine there. I'm very interested in nettles, and we last summer got very enthusiastic and went and picked some nettles and then made a nettle risotto, I think. And both me and my wife, who doesn't suffer from histamine intolerance, were eating it. And after a few mouthfuls, we sort of said, our throat's starting to get really tight. And I think what we had done is we picked nettles that were too big. Is that right? Too mature.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You ideally want to get the spring nettles, but also sometimes so for some people, they can be a little intense and they're very astringent. So that means that's part of the drying action. They'll draw tissue together. And then for some people, so the botanical name is urticodiocan, and urtication is like literally intentionally stinging yourself with nettles to bring sensation to part of the body.
Wow. Yeah.
For some people that works really well. And for some people, they get an incredible allergic reaction.
Yeah.
So for people who have a reaction to needles, sometimes it's helpful just to start gradually.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is herbs are not one size fits all. It's ultimately about really knowing your body, the root cause of why a symptom is happening, and then working with plants to create balance.
Yeah. And I think, teas are a really interesting way to think about herbs, aren't they? I mean, Tulsi tea. Tulsi? I love Tulsi, and I find that very helpful for histamine intolerance. I don't really know much about Tulsi, but I do find it very handy.
Yeah, Tulsi is great. Yeah, it's very. Tulsi's in the mint family, so and all plants in the mint family are what are called diffusive. They kind of diffuse energy evenly throughout the body, so very energizing. And also, Tulsi is a really wonderful adaptogen, which helps your body respond to stress more easily and readily the more you drink it over time. Yeah.
Thank you for sending me a copy of the book. It's a beautiful tome, and we're going on holiday in a few days, and I'm looking forward to digging into it more there. Is the intention that people pick it up or read it cover to cover, or pick it up when they need something, or gain inspiration at random from different pages? How do you want people to read it?
I mean, I would love for people to, on the first read, to read it cover to cover. And then the way that I arrange the book, it's also a memoir. I weave in my own journey of healing into each chapter, and each chapter is devoted to a different plant. That kind of illuminates the theme and the memoir elements of the book. And the book is broken up into 5 sections, and the plants really kind of somehow embody the theme of each section of the book. So I would love for people to read it cover to cover as an experience. And then I'm hoping that the book is also becomes a resource for people as they move through different challenges or obstacles, hopefully referring back to the book as something that helps them in their process of healing.
Yeah. Did it take a long time to write?
It did and it didn't. I feel like a lot of it is a culmination of my work that I've been doing for many years through Sacred Warrior. And I actually spent 6 months in the Highlands last year. I got quote unquote stuck there during lockdown, and it was just a perfect way to start the book. I was basically in a cottage in the Highlands. So I really downloaded the bulk of it there. And but I would say I was ruminating on it and thinking about it for years before that. So that it was almost like it came out of me in that way.
Wow.
But I went to bed, woke up thinking about the book. I mean, I was in solitude in the Highlands for 6 months, and then I finished it here in the Northeast, where I am now in Western Massachusetts. So it took a while. It's a dense book, I think.
It is. I mean, that's why I asked. It's a beautifully produced piece of work. Listen, I run a small publishing company. I know what it takes to produce even a very small book, let alone an impressive tome like yours. So,
thank you.
Yeah. And then you mentioned the retreats and everything you do with your site with Sacred Warrior, and I'm interested to know. Well, I mean, what's your day like? We've already talked about the infusions that you've drunk this morning. You've already mentioned you don't have a TV. What are some of the other things that we might be interested in terms of your lifestyle?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't been doing in-person retreats or teaching for quite a while now because of the pandemic. And I'm hoping to start that again. I've been in meetings lately with a lot of my partners in Costa Rica and in Scotland and other places where I run in the Wolf Conservation Center to in-person experiences to start those up again. So that there's been a pause with that. Lately, to just talk about the present, one of my practices is getting up really, really early in the morning, stretching and going straight to writing. I just find that there's just like that segue between like sleeping and waking is where I often do my best writing. I'm in this sort of like in between liminal space.
Yeah.
So I'll do stream of consciousness writing right when I wake up in the morning, and then I often there are just like gems to draw from there. So that's one of the first things I do. I have my herbal practices, of course. I'll make an herbal infusion every morning that I drink. One of my consistent plants is oat straw. I've been drinking that every single morning for years. That's a nervous system restorative and really nourishing. And then when, now that the weather's nice, I always go for a walk in nature, connecting with the plants, walking outside. I've been traveling a little bit lately. So, but I do weave in some sort of like embodiment practice, movement practice, meditation practice each day. Yeah. But I'm become fairly flexible with it because I've been moving around a lot. Yeah. But there's certain pillars that I touch on each day, whether it's creative expression, connecting with nature, and then some sort of like attunement to like checking with my body and just being.
Great. Yeah.
Just being present,
Yeah.
Presence.
I was actually just thinking about this morning. You mentioned the mornings and that creativity. I think that I'm always interested in the things that have the maximum impact on my day. Mm-hmm. And certainly exercise and meditation, huge impact on my day. But then also I've noticed just not going to the bedroom with my phone in there. Waking up in the morning, it's probably the most important part of my work day, just lying in bed and having a little think. It's mad. Mm-hmm. When all the ideas come in, I think about what I need. I have fresh ideas. There's nothing else impinging on my consciousness. And yet I still sometimes go to the bedroom with my phone, So I need to actually start tracking and keeping myself accountable to leaving the phone downstairs here in the kitchen and then making sure I go upstairs with no distractions.
It's hard. It's very addictive, Yeah, but I agree. It's like it starts my day right when I just go straight to writing. Because it's not just about producing good writing. It's about just like downloading, filtering out all the noise in my head, getting clear about how I'm feeling. And it just helps me start my day. Whether it's maybe writing down my dreams or starting my day with like a level of self-awareness, I know when I don't do that, I something feels a little off. Definitely when I look at my phone first thing in the morning, that's not a good thing.
Oh God, yeah. And yet what percentage of people would you say actually do? I mean, probably 80%. And I know actually when I'm more stressed, I tend to, the real rigor of the self-practice of leaving the phone downstairs miles away from the bedroom seems to just go a little bit and it ends up in my room.
It's funny though. I notice there are times that I do it when I'm excited about something. Right. Like I'm excited about a message or an email. I want to look at it right away. And so sometimes for me is even harder. When I know when I'm stressed, I think I'm the opposite, that I'm like, okay, it's time to leave it.
Oh, okay. Good.
But if I'm really excited to hear about something or to get an email or to get, then I'm much more like, I'm much more apt to like just go right to my phone. So I need a little more discipline there.
Well, it's definitely location based, isn't it? It's a bit like chocolate. If you've got chocolate in the house, you'll eat it. If you've got your phone in the room, you'll check it.
Basically.
Yeah. So now, what is one book that you would recommend, Vanessa, and one tip for living with more energy and vitality?
The first book that comes to mind is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And that book has been by my bedside for almost 2 decades. I just love that book. She's a Jungian analyst and a storyteller, and she collected folk tales from various like cultures around the world, and also her own background, which is Hungarian and Mexican. And she just retells a lot of different fairy tales, and then breaks down their symbolism and significance and how we can apply them to our own lives. But through it all, and I know that this book really influenced my own work, it's all about reclaiming the wild self, the original self, that part of us that's connected to nature. She talks about the wild woman as an archetype. And I also, not necessarily because of this book, but I have a partnership with the Wolf Conservation Center for many years. So this book, for me, when I read it, it just touched on so many things that resonated. Yeah. It just, she was speaking directly to me. And I know this has been a really I don't know, just an important book for many women and anyone who like really wants to connect with that wild feminine archetype, which I think is in everyone to some degree, reconnecting with the earth, our bodies, all of that. So it's such a beautiful book. And it's one that I keep turning back to because you can just, it's very thematic. And, it's one of those books where you can read the story and the way she describes the story as it applies to our own lives. Every time I look at it a little bit differently. So it's just a book that's an absolute resource, I feel.
Yeah, great. I think I'll recommend that to my wife as well.
Good.
And then what about one tip for living with more energy and vitality?
Well, going back to what we talked about earlier, reconnecting with the land around you. And I know that people listening are probably in various stages of doing that. Some people may know how to identify all the plants and trees around them, but have never been to a place where they can harvest their own medicine. So maybe taking that step if you're familiar with them. If you don't know how to identify learn how to identify the plants and trees around you. For me, like I mentioned earlier, it really awakened the sense of wonder I had when I was a child. And it becomes a mindfulness practice. It really does. You're more present to your environment and you realize, the subtitle is Deepening Intimacy with the Living Earth. It helps you to realize that the earth is literally alive. We're part of a living ecosystem, and that that notion and connecting to that and learning how to harvest my own medicine and forage and, harvesting wild food and medicine, that has increased my energy and vitality like nothing else, honestly.
Yeah. Fantastic. So, yeah. That's great. Well, look, Awakening Artemis came out in the last month or so, doesn't it? And it's available everywhere.
It should be available everywhere. I encourage people to get it from their local bookstores. So.
And where else can people find out about you, everything you're doing? Hopefully, if you start doing retreats in person again and everything else.
So my personal website is vanessachakour.com. The last name is spelled CHAKOUR.com. And Sacred Warrior is sacredwarrior.co. And I'm really excited I'm going to be relaunching a lot of the in-person experiences. I will probably be doing a retreat in Scotland with some of my friends there this summer. As to restart things. Yeah.
Thank goodness for that. It's time.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Well, look, thank you for the copy of the book and good luck with it. And hope the retreats go well in person. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
That's it for today's podcast. Thank you to Vanessa. Thank you for listening as well. I'm still slightly sore from the 3 peaks, but feeling pretty good now. And in fact, I'm walking around central London as we speak and just heading off to the gym. So I'm inspired to do so much more exercise now that I did so much exercise at the weekend and I felt great. And after that, I will be taking something that is my podcast partner this week, Magnesium Breakthrough. It'll be in my lunchtime stack and in my bedtime stack as well. If you go to magbreakthrough.com/zestology, you can get all the details and you can get 10% off as well if you use the code zestology10. So magnesium, definitely something I've been stacking up on since that challenge at the weekend because, to be honest, I thought I'd be more achy than I was. And I'm feeling pretty good, so maybe the magnesium has had something to do with it, but it's good for sleep, good for overall health, and definitely good when you've got aching muscles too. And I find it's one of my absolute go-tos that I always have in my cabinet, and it was packed in my luggage when we went up to the Yorkshire 3 Peaks as well. So magbreakthrough.com/zestology, they are my podcast partners today. Thank you for listening. I will stop banging on about the Yorkshire 3 Peaks next week, but if you want to see the photo of us, the signature photo of us at the top of the mountain, I think it's actually at the top of the second peak, you can head to Instagram. My Instagram is @TonyWrighton, and I'll put the pic on there. It was so tempting to put a lot of 3 Peaks spam on there, but I just put one picture on there so you can have a look at that. And I will see you next week on Zestology. And the other very exciting thing is, before the next Zestology comes out, it is the Health Optimization Summit in London, in Islington. And I'm co-hosting the main stage with the founder, Tim Gray, and I'm also speaking there too. So I think to do some work on that, on my presentation, I think. That's going to be at the weekend. So if you're listening to this, haven't got a ticket, I think you can use the code TonyWrighton for 20% off. You've left it late, but it is going to be a lot of fun. And if you do go, please come and say hello. I'll see you there.